Thank you very much, Isabel, and thanks for turning out. It's a great, great crowd. This hat Donald Trump gave to me, so I just had to wear it anyway. This is going to be a boring list, so talk amongst yourselves. I want to thank so many people for these 40 years. I should not be up here being in any way honored. There should be 2,000, 2,500 writers and small press editors up here with me because it's their honor. But I'm going to try, okay? First, to the 2,000 writers who have been in the Pushcart Prize over the years, reprinted. To the thousands of small presses who have made nominations, over 1,000 the last in Pushcart Prize number 40 alone, for sale right out there. Thanks for the more than 2,500 poems, essays, and stories reprinted in our 40 editions. This is an astonishing fact. Almost none of these beautiful works would have been published if it had not been for our small press book editors and little magazines. None. Imagine the desolation of a culture without non-commercial publishing. Imagine it. A true cultural wasteland. Thanks especially to Phil Schultz, Monica Banks, and Isabel, and the Writers' Studio for putting on these celebrations over many, many years. And they don't do it just for Pushcart, they do it for little magazines all over the country. And thanks for the hat. This hat came from Phil, not Trump. We can't figure out what the B stands for. I asked him, maybe it's Brooklyn, maybe the Brooklyn Nets, or the Dodgers, who knows. But anyway, I love the hat. Thank you, Phil. It's for my birthday. And thanks to our founding editors, Anais Nin, Joyce Carol Oates, Ralph Ellison, Reynolds Price, Paul Bowles, and many more. They're listed in the book. Without their okay, way back in 1975, there would have been nothing. We wouldn't be sitting here today. And those 2,500 wonderful works would not have been honored as we have tried to do. Thanks to the 220 contributing editors for this edition, especially Kim Adonisio and David Bottoms, our poetry editors. We switch poetry editors every year because they get totally burned out. How would you like to read 4,000 poems? That's what they do every year. And thanks to W. Norton Company, a stellar publisher. Dozier Hammond is here, the former sales manager from Norton. They're employee-owned, and they've distributed Pushcart for almost the entire 40 years. Norton is a noble enterprise. Thanks to our endowment board members, many of whom are here tonight. You will find envelopes in the books out there. This is for your contribution. The Strand is selling them. If you care to become a patron of the Pushcart Prize, you will be listed in the Pushcart Prize forever. It's a free passage for eternal life, very cheap. Thanks to John Baker, Sybil Steinberg, George Slovic, and the people from Publishers Weekly who have reviewed every single edition for 40 years, and many, many other reviewers such as Kirkus. Even the New York Times was in there, and there'll be a feature in the New York Times on November 22nd about this very event. So the commercial world has come to our help, and the trumpets blaring, because I think many people in the world of publishing commerce are a little sick of the emphasis on money all the time. And more important, I almost forgot, thanks to my wife, Jeannie, who's put up with her holy fool of a husband. Yay! Yeah. And to my daughter, Lily. Oh, there's Jeannie over there. And my daughter, Lily's up there filming the event for the ages. And to our readers, of course, John Galassi. I just reminded John that he was the poetry editor for the Pushcart Prize back in 1980 with Grace Schulman. So John and I go way, way back. We were just kids then, just kids. And I think John was so shocked by the job of reading poetry for Pushcart that he moved on into Farrar, Straus, and Giroux and tried to hide out. And Ben Marcus is here, my friend from From Maine, we summer in Maine in the same Blue Hill Peninsula, and you may not know this about Ben, but he makes floats for the local July 4th parade. He's a terrific float maker. And I think he told me he likes to do that better almost than writing. And Colum McCann is here, who has a terrific story in Pushcart Prize 40. He's going to wear his hat, too. I asked him if Jeannie wanted me to take the hat off, but Colum is going to wear his hat, too. So I'm keeping my hat on. And Zadie Smith is here. One of the most terrific stories I've ever read is the lead in the Pushcart Prize out there, the lead story by Zadie. And Sharon Olds won 4 Pushcart Prizes. What more can I say? And my friend Philip Schultz, who won another prize. It starts with a P. Poultry, something like that. I don't know. Something like that. I know I've left out dozens of friends, and you'll have to forgive me. Hi, John Baker. So please forgive me. 40 years seems like an impossibly long time. I simply can't fathom it. It's like staring at the ocean, trying to comprehend it all. How to explain Pushcart's survival? Well, it's simple, stupid. The spirit of our writers will not be denied by commercial exclusion. We do not write for money or to make others wealthy with our words. We are not content providers. We are not consumers either. We are writers, and we are children of God. That is why we survive and why we thrive. Thank you.
Well, I actually came to New York, I think it was in 76. It was in 76, and that's when this began. And I remember meeting Bill at the Lion's Head, and I think it was the first year, it was about to come out, and it was an idea. And it's amazing to me. It's one of the wonders that this idea should become an institution that would last this long and be such a symbol of achievement to so many people. Last week, it was family weekend at my son's college, and I went up there, and there was a fall reading list. And 2 of the 4 writers prominently, right at the beginning, mentioned that among other accomplishments that they had Pushcart Prize, they were Pushcart Prize nominees. And I thought, how lovely, how amazing that it's such a source. We have students who are nominated, and it's a real sense of encouragement. It's a light, a beacon out there. And I know firsthand how hard Bill works. I mean, you can't call him when he's not reading and reading and reading. And it's a wonder. It's a very dedicated. So it's an honor to be part of this. I think it's 10 years that we've been doing this. I'm going to read a few poems from a new book collection. Not finished yet. Aardvarks. My 15-year-old son pointed out to me that I usually pronounce it Artavarks. And he constantly is correcting he's non-dyslexic, so It's summer and the jitney is packed. We live in East Hampton, where Bill lives, and I commute. It's summer and the jitney is packed, every seat taken, except for the one across the aisle, in which a man has barricaded his window seat with a briefcase and jacket, an act meant to confront others with his superiority. Munching chips and guffawing at a YouTube video of an obese woman riding a scooter down a country road, towing a younger obese woman in a wheelchair, he reminds me of a neighbor's dog that would steal and bury our dog's bones, then growl defiantly on his side of our fence. Pythagoras believed our souls ended up inside the bodies of animals selected as rewards and punishments. The 3 giggling girls behind me, stretching their legs into the aisle every time the shy attendant passes, forcing him to stutter apologies in a Slavic accent. Poodles, probably. Pythagoras also believed the shapes of numbers symbolized our significance. Well, sequestered here between work and family, thought and dreaming, I'm probably some kind of numinous digit, slowly evolving into, say, an aardvark, hurling down the highway inside a bus camouflaged as a vodka bottle, on its way to a barricaded future on the far side of a fence where all our significance is buried. The teacher. She sat there quietly across the kitchen table, playing solitaire, each sighing breath rising and falling, the green shine of her eyes turning opaque, each descent of her shoulders lowering me, her left shoe tapping a tune I never recognized. Not once did I interrupt, ask for something the way Father always did. I sat across the snowy world, slowly mastering the art of disappearing into someone else. Getting along. My wife and I are getting along. Right now, she's listening. She's a sculptor. Right now, she's listening to Bruce Springsteen in her studio, making out of copper wire and pieces of broken jewelry, plastic rats and wedding rings, a cloud of opalescent prescience. Yesterday, she loved me, she said, even though sometimes I'm an asshole. Why are you laughing? Grateful for the sometimes, I said much of the time I feel like one. Everyone does, she said, except the ones who really are. They think fate is fucking with them. When the color of her eyes turn dark walnut, it means I loved you once, or green, always, maybe. Marriage is the hardest thing, she thinks, harder than God, childhood, or childbirth. When the I won't stay hidden inside the we, forgets where it ends and the we begins, a lush green river of intimacy smothers it, me. Unrequited, it's the point we're always trying to make. The hurt buried inside the pride, hidden inside the pain. Love is an accident of fate, an idea of surprising elasticity, she thinks, I think. Once we said nothing on the phone for 1 hour. Each syllable we didn't speak was visible. Each breath we swallowed us. Each unspoken allegation a covenant of fidelity, a razor our silence rubbed us against. As if love were a house of mirrors, we can't stop wandering inside, viewing every intention from every side. As if we're stuck in hindsight, every day an anniversary, forever crossing a January Monday morning to meet for the first time. How she wouldn't look at me, as if everything we meant to say, feared, and longed to be was there in the stark, fierce diction of her eyes. A story of once, maybe, and always, waiting for us, for we to read. Two more poems. The difference between. Something vibrant and shiny is always hurrying away from me. Some kind of possibility of fidelity to what and whom I meant to be. Something vaguely necessary, even essential. The difference between being late or early, open and closed, bereft and or on the verge of something more interesting. An opulent refrain, say, trying to maintain and keep up with what's vanishing around the corner from where we stand, waiting to be less mysterious, a little more concrete. Solemn or arcane enough to be a quality we can acknowledge, even forgive. There I am, remain, a thought leaning out of reach, glistening like a fish at the back of my psyche, impacted with vibrant possibility. Is this why I remain faithful to everything I've lost along the way? I admit I never wanted to be me, I don't think. Once a beguiling idea disguised as a question to which no answer exists. Afterwards. Suddenly everything feels afterwards, stoic and inevitable. My eyes ringed with the grease of rumor and complicity, my hands eager to hold any agreeable infatuation that might otherwise slip away. Suddenly it's evening, and the lights up and down the street appear hopeful, even magnanimous, swollen as they are with ancient grievances and souring schemes. The sky, however, appears unwelcoming and aloof, eager to surrender its indifference to our suffering. Speaking of suffering, the houses, our sober, recalcitrant houses, are swollen with dreams that have grown opaque with age, hoarding as they do truths untranslatable into auspicious beliefs. Meanwhile, our loneliness, upon which so many laws are based, continues to consume everything. Suddenly, regardless of what the gods say, the present remains uninhabitable, the past unforgiving of the harm it's seen, while the future remains translucent and unambiguous in its desire to elude us. Thank you.
I'd like to just read a page or two of a short story called The Grow Light Blues. It's about a guy who's being experimented on at work with a new feeding technology. Carl Hirsch didn't do holiday parties, at least not correctly. All the so-called people, wind streaming from their faces, fleshy machines spewing pollution, fucking up the environment. If he squinted, the celebrating bodies of his co-workers very nearly blistered into molecules, shining with color. Too often, the whole of it, people, places, and things, looked to scatter, everyone on the verge of turning to soup. So what if there was no precedent for a full-scale human melt, bodies reduced to liquid pouring from a window? You could still worry about it. Sometimes you had to. Tonight's party was in one of those long, skinny city apartments you're supposed to verbally fellate with praise. It was like walking into a tiny, dismal doghouse, a real doghouse, and then kissing the furred ass of the dog who lived there, who was super annoyed to have you clogging up his tiny room. You were allowed to stay as long as you kept using your tongue. Hopefully this doghouse had sick drinks and free money, and those soft bones and sauce they sometimes served at company parties, even if he was only permitted to sniff them because of his feeding regimen. The light, the space, my God, Carl found himself saying to the small, perfectly dressed host who stood on the landing. The host greeted Carl with alarm. Carl reached up too late to cover his face. He didn't want to be a burden, at least not to just anyone, and yet, fuck this guy. Didn't Emily Post have a whole chapter on hiding all reaction to astonishing creatures who appeared at your door? Shutting your little face down so as not to reveal the horror and disgust you might really feel? To the host, Carl said, grinning far too hard, "Just show me to my rooms and I'll get out of everyone's way. Jones is on his way up with my luggage. This is going to be such a fun year, roommate." The host didn't hear him, missed the joke. He was already looking over Carl's shoulder to where people were crowding up the narrow staircase trying to push their way inside. Because heaven, because drinks, because loneliness and flesh pleasure, because the invite said, "Levitate, my friends. Let us see the soles of your feet." Because Mayflower, where they all worked, was pure shithouse. The future was ripe for sexual conquest, and they were busy greasing up their parts. Carl knew he wasn't the type to get fondled when he passed out. Mostly it was because of his face, thanks to his job. Rough on the eyes, tough to the touch. Scratch-proof, though, which was a bonus, particularly if some long-shot apocalypse reared up and he had to go face first into the bramble or some such. For now, partygoers pressing in behind him, he could do nothing but raise his arms and surf forward into the mob, hoping with all his might that the wave would carry him safe and sound back home to his bed. In some ways, it was inevitable that Carl, a few nights later, would take a picture of his balls and send it to the Mayflower email list. After a hot bath, he propped up his phone in the dank zone and captured the crag and the woof, the topographical crimson scorch. He got the shot, pressed share, and released the picture into the ether. It felt all right, a certain unburdening, maybe even like postcoital clarity, chaste and lonely as it was. Afterward, he was tempted to stand at his apartment window and listen through the glass into the pulse of the evening as his message landed at key email terminals throughout the metropolis. If you counted from the beginning, going back to the supposedly sunny morning when Carl was born, this was day 10,700 and something of his tremendously joyful stretch of time, his project above ground. To hear his mother tell it, because certain mothers break into story when you enter their homes, the birds were in ecstasy the day he was born, squawking over the hospital. The air was so crisp and cool that day, his mother would add, that you felt hugged by the wind, her phrase. When little Carl was born, the whole neighborhood, per his mother, held its breath. Someone new is among us, someone special. It was a revisionist birth narrative likely concocted when it struck Carl's mother, poor thing, that her son was just another piercingly boring need machine, underperforming and overwhelming, programmed to crave so much from her that she would soon forget her interests and re-engineer her whole self in order to supply the mothering that would keep her child, at the very least, out of jail, out of a coffin, and out of the sex change doctor's office. At which point she would subtly punish him with nearly imperceptible indifference and ambivalence. Parenting. As far as motives go, his mother had a pretty good one for her wholesale, self-serving fictionalization of Carl's birth, and he forgave her, not that she ever asked him to, for glorifying his unremarkable debut. In his 20s, just before his mother died, when she was listless and storied out, staring through a different hospital window as if surveying the land for her own burial, Carl finally Googled the weather on the day of his birth. And, well, looky there. Rain, 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 ash, fire, murder, murder, rain. A godless Tuesday, unprecedented torrents flooding down from the north, dirt and mud and broken trees and houses split in half. Sunshine maybe, but not in his part of the world. And birds? The internet had little to say on the matter. As it turned out, Carl's photo backfired. The folks at work who opened his attachment, the upper-level creatives at Mayflower, as well as the engineers holed up in the silo in Albuquerque, mistook it for an image of Carl's pitiful neck, or maybe a scalded bit of acreage under his arm. In other words, no one seemed to see anything uniquely scrotal in the photo. Just grim, if understandable, symptom documentation from a man who was perhaps Mayflower's most martyred employee / medical subject / guinea pig / hero / fool, Carl the Boiled, as he'd started to think of himself, taking one for the team. At work the next day, expecting to be shunned and sort of figuratively barfed on, maybe swept into the farewell room where underachievers got hand-stabbed by Kipler, the CEO, Carl instead collected a few drive-by hugs. He was heavily touched, right on the body, by people he'd hardly even met. A kind of unprecedented love was brought to bear all over his person. "Oh my gosh," Cora from Nutrients said, holding him at arm's length and staring wildly just above his head. She was always the one putting the needle in and sometimes forgetting to take it out. "Carl, honey?" "I'm okay," Carl whispered, suddenly shy. "I know," Cora said. "You are. You will be. You are so brave. I can't believe you're being so open about what this is doing to you. It serves them right." She shook her fist. Cora the explorer. He wouldn't think of her that way anymore. He actually appreciated her kindness, if misdirected, if incorrect. Did it matter? She squeezed his waist and he felt himself pee a little. His bladder seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Later in the morning, an older man ducked into Carl's cubicle, a man who seemed to have been designed by experts to embody sorrow and regret. He shook his head with deep theatrical empathy. His name was maybe Murray. Maury? Perhaps it was Larry. He was a tech. He performed overnight adjustments to the computer displays that were slowly roasting Carl's face in the service of the greater good. Money piles for Mayflower, loss of bodily function for Carl. "I'm just thinking about you and feeling for you," the man said to Carl, stooped in a kind of prayer bow. "And knowing that there's no way I can really know, I can't." He paused. "What you're going through, none of us can." "Everything we can't know," Carl said, shaking his head as cheerfully as he could. "Maybe it's time to cry uncle. Mysteries won, us nothing. We lose." The man dipped his head again, pressed his hands together. "Anyway, it's what we signed up for, right?" Carl said, trying and failing to picture the exact moment when he'd agreed to take part in the experiment. Had it ever happened? He couldn't remember the last time he'd written his name, said yes, nodded his head, assented. Maybe by simply staying alive, he implied his agreement and cooperation. Simply by walking the halls at Mayflower and not crawling into a hole, he was saying, "Yes, yes, please test your equipment on me, especially the equipment that burns. I would be most pleased if you would." How sweet of this man to visit and thank Carl for his service. The old Carl would have smiled and thanked him, but his thanking utensil, connected inexorably to his face, was broken. He had the paralyzed head of a mascot. What he needed now in order to engage in human congress were emoticons on popsicle sticks that he could wave around, lest everyone start to think that he was dead on the inside, too. Thanks.
Tonight, I'm going to read a few parts of the thing that I published in the Pushcart Prize anthology, whenever it was, 40 years ago. This is a poem that Montale wrote. It's called Xenia. It's an elegy for his wife. And it's very different from what Ben just read. Dear little insect, they called you Mosca. I don't know why. This evening, while I was reading Deutero Isaiah in the half-light, you reappeared beside me. But you weren't wearing glasses. You couldn't see me. And I couldn't make you out in the dusk without their glitter. No glasses or antennae, poor insect, and only imaginary wings. A Bible falling apart, hardly reliable. The dark of night, lightning, thunder, and then not even a storm. Can it be you left so quickly without speaking? But it's absurd to think you still had lips. At the St. James in Paris, I'll have to ask for a single room. They don't like unpaired guests. And likewise in the false Byzantium of your Venice hotel. And go straight to the booth of your old friends, the operators, to share, once the dial tone has faded, the desire to have you back, if only in a gesture or habit. We practiced a whistle a sign of recognition for the hereafter. I'm trying to perfect it in the hope we're all already dead, but don't know it. Your talk, so hesitant, so reckless, is still the only thing that satisfies me. But the accent's different, the color's changed. I'll get used to hearing you, deciphering you in the ticking of the teletype, in the rolling smoke of my Brissago cigars. Hearing was your only way of seeing. The phone bill has gone down to almost nothing. Did she pray? Yes, she prayed to St. Anthony, who helps recover lost umbrellas and other things from the cloakroom of St. Hermes. Is that all? For her dead too, and for me. It's enough, said the priest. Spring emerges at its mole-like pace. I won't hear your talk about poisonous antibiotics anymore, or the spike in your femur, or the worldly goods you were fleeced of by a sharp so-and-so. Spring advances with its thick mists, its long light, its intolerable hours. I won't hear your struggle anymore with the undertow of time, or ghosts, or the logistical problems of summer. Your brother died young. You were the scruffy girl who eyes me, posed in the oval of your portrait. He wrote music that's unpublished, unheard. It's buried in a trunk or rotting now. Maybe someone's recreating it unwittingly, if what's written is written. I loved him without having met him. Except for you, no one remembered him. I didn't investigate. Now it's pointless. After you, I'm the only one for whom he existed. But it's possible, you know, to love a shadow, since we're shadows ourselves. They say my poetry is a poetry of not belonging. But if it was yours, it was someone's. Yours, who are no longer form, but essence. They say that poetry at its height praises the fleeting all. They deny that the tortoise is faster than lightning. You alone knew that motion is no different from stasis, that the void is fullness and blue sky is the most diffuse of clouds, which helps me to better understand your long journey imprisoned in bandages and plaster. And yet it's no consolation knowing that one or two, we are one thing. This is from the second part. Death didn't concern you. Even your dogs had died, and the asylum doctor they called the crazy uncle, and your mother with her specialty of rice and frogs, a Milanese triumph. Even your father, who keeps watch over me morning and evening from his miniature effigy on the wall. Nevertheless, death didn't concern you. I had to go to the funerals, shut up in a taxi, keeping my distance to avoid tears and entanglements. But life itself and its festivals of vanity and greed didn't matter to you either, and even less the universal gangrenes that turn men into wolves. A tabula rasa, except there was a point I couldn't understand, and this point concerned you. We mourned the shoehorn a long time, the piece of rusty tin we'd always had with us. It seemed indecent to introduce such a horror among stucco and gilt. It must have been at the Danieli that I forgot to put it back in our luggage. No doubt Hedia, the maid, tossed it into the canalazzo. And how could I have written to ask them to look for that sliver of tin? There was a prestige, ours, at stake, and the faithful Hedia had saved it. I've come down at least 1,000,000 stairs, your arm in mine, and now that you're not here, there's an abyss at every step. Our long journey was brief, nevertheless. Mine continues, though I no longer concern myself with connections, reservations, tie-ups, or the turmoil of him who believes reality is what we see. I've come down millions of stairs, your arm in mine, but not because with 4 eyes we may see more. I went down them with you because I knew that of the 2 of us, no matter how clouded your pupils, only you could see truly. The wine steward poured you a little inferno. You were terrified. Do I have to drink it? Isn't it enough to have been there at low heat? And paradise, is there a paradise? I believe so, ma'am, but no one wants sweet wines anymore. Resurfacing out of an infinity of time, Celia, the Philippine, phoned to find out how you were. I think she's well, I say, maybe better than before. What do you mean, think? Isn't she there anymore? Maybe more than before, only, Celia, try to understand. On the other end of the line, in Manila, or some other name in the atlas, even she faltered and suddenly hung up. 2 more. I've hung the daguerreotype of your father as a baby in my room. It's more than 100 years old. In the absence of my own confused pedigree, I'm trying to reconstruct yours, but in vain. We weren't horses. Our ancestors' dates aren't in the almanacs. Those who claim to know their own never existed themselves, nor did we for them. And then, still it remains the case that something happened, maybe some nothing that is everything. The flood has buried all the furniture, the papers, the pictures that crowded a basement locked with a double lock. Maybe the red Morocco books fought blindly, and Dubow's endless dedications, the wax seal with Ezra's beard, Alain's Valérie, the first edition of the Canti Orfici, and some shaving brushes, countless knickknacks, and all your brother Silvio's music. 10, 12 days in the acid jaws of naphtha and excrement. They must have suffered much before losing their identity. And I'm encrusted up to my neck as well, though my status was in doubt from the beginning. It's not mud that assails me, it's the facts of an incredible reality I never believed in. In the face of them, my courage was the greatest of your gifts, and maybe you didn't know it.
Someone asked me the other day, don't you miss reading all those sex poems at your readings? And I said, yes, I do. And so I decided to start tonight with the last poem in my book just before the book called Stag's Leap, which is the divorce book. Psalm. Bending over at the August table where the summer towels are kept, putting a stack on the bottom shelf, I felt his kiss in its shock of whiskers on an inner curve of that place I know by his knowing, have seen with the vision of his touch. To be entered thus, on a hip-high table piled with sheaves of towels, bath and hand, terry cloth Eden, is to feel at one's center a core of liquid heat as if one is an earth. Sometime later, we were kissing in near sleep. I think we did it this time, I whispered. I think we're joined at the hip. He has a smile from the heart. At this hour, I live in its light. I gnaw very softly on his jaw. Would you want me to eat you in the Andes in a plane crash? I murmur. To survive? Yes. We smile. He asks, would you want me to eat you to survive? I would love it, I cry out. We almost sleep. There is a series of arms around us and between us in sets, touches given as if received. Did you think we were going to turn into each other? And I get one of those smiles, as if his face is a speckled, rubbled, sandy, satiny cactus flower 8 inches across. Yes, he whispers. I know he is humoring, rote, sweet talking. A sliver of late sun is coming through between the curtains. It lights the scaly surfaces of my knuckles, its line like a needle held to cleanse it above a match. I move my wedding finger to stand in the slit of flame. From the ring's curve there rises a fan of borealis fur like the first instant of sunrise. Do not tell me this could end. Do not tell me. Makes me much happier to read it because I've decided that I like it as a work of art. And so that just makes me happy. It's a long time ago, too. So one of my favorite books of poems of late, in the last few years, is Evie Shockley's The New Black. And there's a poem in it I've heard Evie read at readings a few times called Ode to My Blackness. And after I heard it a few times, I wrote this poem. Ode to my whiteness. You were invisible to me. You went without saying. You were my weapon secret from myself. Whatever I got, you helped get it for me. You were my ignorance. Because of you, I was not innocent. I did not see that. You were my blinding light. My dreams had a blank area in the center, taking up most of the screen they played on in my sleep, a blazing circle that blanked out the core of the scene. I thought it was my mother's violence, but it was you, too. You, the unseen fat which fed me in the wilderness. You, my Masonic handshake. You, my silence. You, my drone. You, my collaborator. You, my magician's cloak of steam. You, my dissembler. You, mine. I, yours, irisless eyeball. You, my blindness, goader of my helpless act. You, my stillness. My friend's blackness, a dancer. You, another. The two of you moving together. And then I want to read one ode from the book. I have such an unfortunate last name to publish a book called Odes. It's really too bad. This is the first ode in the book. Ode to the Hymen. I don't know when you came into being inside me when I was inside my mother. Maybe when the involuntary muscles were setting like rose jello. I love to think of you then, so whole, so impervious, you and the clitoris as safe as the lives in which you were housed. They would have had to kill both my mother and me to get at either of you. I love her at this moment as the big fortress around me, the matron head around the sweet meat of my maidenhead. I don't know who invented you to keep a girl's inwards clean and well cupboarded. Dear wall, dear gate, dear stile, dear Dutch door, not a cat flap nor a swinging door, but a one-time piñata. How many places in the body were made to be destroyed once? You were very sturdy, weren't you? You took your job seriously. I'd never felt such pain. You were the woman the magician saws in two. I was proud of you, turning to a cupful of the bright arterial ingredient. And how lucky we were, you and I, that we got to choose when and with whom and where and why. Plush pincushion, somehow related to statues that wept. It happened on the rug of a borrowed living room, but I felt as if we were in Diana's woods, he and I and you together, or as if we were where the magma from the core of the earth burst up through the floor of the sea. Thank you for your life and death. Thank you for your flower girl walk before me, throwing down your scarlet petals. It would be years before I married, years before I carried within me a tiny baby hymen, near the eggs with other teensy hymens within them. But you unscrolled the carpet, leading me into the animal life of a woman. You were a sort of blood mother to me. First you held me close for 18 years, and then you let me go. And I'll close. I always like to read a poem that I've never read to anyone before. And so this is that one. I was out in LA and I wrote this poem. It's called As If. And then suddenly I think, my mother is one of the women in the history of the world who has had the most poems written about her. But the others were known for some achievement, as if my mother was conducting music or shaping sculptures when she was beating me into a plowshare, as she had been a plowshare beaten into a sword. What was wrong with my family, that for generations the mothers beat the daughters? What was wrong with the men? What were they doing? What were they leaving undone? And my mother nursing her breasts and her milk as representative of the female, the doe, the mammary goddess, has been sung. And her singing, her sharps and her flats, have been sung. When I was born, there was a paucity of songs of women doing what my mother, when she was done, would have come to have done, given birth and nursed and bled and beaten one of her children as her mother had beaten one. Always the second daughter, the second one who had been supposed to be a son. When the farmer beats his wife, who beats the dog, who beats the cat, who beats the mouse, who does the mouse beat? She does not beat her young. Maybe she beats the catskin drum. 4 beats to a line, and I'm done. I'm putting it here as morning comes, as the full day moon is going down into the mountain to the east, like a coin, heads deposited as it dissolves in the light, mouth open, great eyes open unseeing, she goes down singing. With our species, language and tools and ritual burial were born together. I want to bury my mother, if possible, with both truth and honor. Thank you.
I'm going to read from a short story called Shukul. I'm going to jump into the middle of the story to sort of semi-explain the word, and then I'll read a couple of pages from the beginning of the work. A novella had arrived from the publisher in Tel Aviv 8 months before, a beautifully written story by an Arab Israeli from Nazareth, an important piece of work, she thought. She had begun immediately to translate it, the story of a middle-aged couple who had lost their 2 children. She had come upon the word shukul. She cast around for a word to translate it, but there was no proper match. There were words, of course, for widow, for widower, and orphan, but no noun, no adjective for a parent who had lost a child. None in Irish either. She looked in Russian, in French, in German, in other languages too, but could find analogues only in Sanskrit, vilama, and in Arabic, takhla, a mother, mathkul, a father. Still none in English. It bothered her for days. She wanted to be true to the text, to identify the invisible, torn open, ripped apart, stolen. In the end, she settled upon the formal bereaved, not precise enough, she thought. No mystery in it at all, no music, hardly a proper translation, bereaved. So this is Shukul. It was their first Christmas in Galway together, mother and son. The cottage was hidden alongside the Atlantic, blue-windowed, slate-roofed, tucked near a grove of sycamore trees. The branches were bent inland by the wind. White spindrift blew up from the sea, landing softly on the tall hedges in the back garden. During the day, Rebecca could hear the rhythmic approach and fall of the waves against the shore. At night, the sounds seemed to double. Even in the wet chill of the December evenings, she slept with her window open, listening to the roll of the water sounding up from the low cliffs, rasping over the run of stone walls, sweeping toward the house where it seemed to pause, hover a moment, then break. On Christmas morning, she left his present by the fireplace, boxed and wrapped and tied with red ribbons. Thomas tore the package open, and it fell in a bundle at his feet. He had no idea what it was at first. He held it by the legs, then the waist, turned it upside down, clutched it dark against his chest. She reached behind the tree and removed a second package, neoprene boots and a hood. Thomas stripped his shoes and shirt. He was thin, strong, pale. When he pulled off his trousers, she glanced away. The wetsuit was liquid around him. She had bought it 2 sizes too big so he could grow into it. He spread his arms wide and whirled round the room. She hadn't seen him so happy in months. Rebecca gestured to him that they would go down to the water in just a few hours. 13 years old, and there was already a whole history written in him. She had adopted him from Vladivostok at the age of 6. On her visit to the orphanage, she had seen him crouched beneath a swing set. His hair was blonde, his eyes a pellucid blue, sores on his neck, long thin scars on his lower back. He'd been born deaf, but when she called out his name, he had turned quickly. A sign, she was sure of it. Shards of his story would always be a mystery to her. The early years, an ancestry she knew nothing about, a rumor that he'd been born near a rubbish dump, the possible inheritances, mercury, radiation sickness, beatings. She was aware of what she was getting herself into, but she had been with Alan then. They stayed in a shabby hotel overlooking the Bay of Amour, days of bribes and panic, anxious phone calls late in the night, long hours in the waiting room. A diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome gave them pause. Still, they left after 6 weeks, swinging Thomas between them. On the Aeroflot flight, the boy kept his head on her shoulder. At customs in Dublin, her fingers trembled over the paperwork. The stamp came down when Alan signed. She grabbed Thomas's hand, and she ran him laughing through arrivals. It was her 41st birthday. The days were good then, a 3-bedroom house and step-aside, a series of counselors, therapists, speech experts, and even her parents to help them out. Now, 7 years on, she was divorced, living out west. Her parents were gone, and her task had doubled. Her savings were stretched. The bills slipped one after the other through the letterbox. There were rumours that the special school in Galway might close. Still, she wasn't given to bitterness or loud complaint. She made a living translating from Hebrew to English. Wedding vows, business contracts, cultural pamphlets. There was a literary novel or two from a left-wing publisher in Tel Aviv. The pay was derisory, but she liked stepping into that otherness, and the books were a stay against indifference. 48 years old, and there was a beauty about her, an olive to her skin, a sloe to her eyes, an aquiline sweep to her nose. Her hair was dark, her body thin and supple. In the small village she fit in well, even if she stood at a sharp angle to the striking blondness of her son. She relished the Gaeltacht, the shifting weather, the hard light, the wind off the Atlantic. Bundled up against the chill, they walked along the pier amongst the lobster pots and coiled ropes and disintegrating fishing boats. The rain slapped the windows of the shuttered shops. No tourists in winter. In the supermarket, the local women often watched them. More than once she was asked if she was the ban cowrach, a phrase she liked, the help, the nanny, the midwife. There was a raw wedge of thrill in her love for him. The presence of the unknown, the journey out of childhood, the step into a future self. Some days Thomas took her hand, leaned on her shoulder as they drove through the village, beyond the abandoned schoolhouse, past the whitewashed bungalows towards home. She wanted to clasp herself over him, shroud him, absorb whatever came his way. Most of all, she wanted to discover what sort of man might emerge from underneath that very pale skin. Thomas wore the wetsuit all Christmas morning. He lay on the floor playing video games, his fingers fluid on the console. Over the rim of her reading glasses, Rebecca watched the grey stripe along the sleeve move. It was, she knew, a game she shouldn't allow. Tanks, ditches, killings, tracer bullets. But it was a small sacrifice for an hour of quiet. No rage this Christmas, no battles, no tears. At noon, she gestured for him to get ready. The light would fade early. She had 2 wetsuits of her own in the bedroom cupboard, but she had left them hanging, pulled on her running shoes, an anorak, a warm scarf. At the door, Thomas threw his duffel coat loose around the neoprene. "Just a quick dip," she said to him in Irish. There was no way of knowing how much of any language Thomas could understand. His signing was rudimentary, but she could tell a thing or two from the carry of his body, the shape of his shoulders, the hold of his mouth. Mostly, she divined from his eyes. He was handsome in a roguish way. The eyes themselves were narrow, yes, but agile. He had no other physical symptoms of fetal alcohol, no high brow, no thin lip, no flat philtrum. They stepped out into a shaft of light so clear and bright it seemed made of bone. Just by the low stone wall, a cloud curtained across, and the light dropped grey again. A few stray raindrops stung their faces, and this was what she loved about the west of Ireland, the weather made from cinema. A squall could blow in at any time, and moments later the grey would be hunted open with blue. One of the walls down by the bottom field had been reinforced with metal pipes. It was the worst sort of masonry, against all local tradition, but the wind moved across the mouths of the hollow tubes and pierced the air with a series of accidental whistles. Thomas ran his hands over the pipes, one by one, adjusting the song of the wall. She was sure his fingers could gauge the vibrations in the metal. Small moments like these, they crept up, sliced her open. Halfway toward the water, he broke into a Charlie Chaplin walk, twirling an imaginary stick as he bent forward into the gale, feet pointed sideways. He made a whooping sound as he topped a rise and caught sight of the sea. She called for him to wait. It was habit, even if his back was turned. He remained at the edge of the cliff, walking in place, almost a perfect imitation. Where had he seen Chaplin? Some video game, maybe, some television show. There were times she thought that despite the doctors, he might still someday crack open the impossible longings that she still held for him. At the precipice, above the granite sea stack, they paused. The waves hurried to shore, long scribbles of white. She tapped him on the small of his back, where the wetsuit bunched. The neoprene hood framed his face. His blonde hair peeked out. "Stay where it's shallow now, promise me." She scooted behind him on her hunkers. The grass was cold on her fingertips. Her feet slid forward in the mud. She dropped from the small ledge into the coarse scree below. The rocks were slick with seaweed. A small crab scuttled in the dark pool. Thomas was already knee-deep in the cove. Don't go any further now, she called. She had been a swimmer when she was a child. She'd competed for Dublin and Leinster both, rows of medals in her childhood bedroom, a championship trophy from Brussels. The rumour of a scholarship to an American university, a rotator cuff injury, had cut her short. She had taught Thomas to swim during the warmth of the summer. He knew the rules. No diving, stay in the cove, never get close to the edge of the sea stack. Twice he looked as if he was about to round the edge of the dark rock into the deeper water, once when he saw a windsurfer, yet again when a yellow kayak went swiftly by. She waved her arms. Just no more, love, okay? He returned to her, fanned the water with his fingers, splashed it high around her, both arms in his chaplain motion. Stop it, please, said Rebecca softly. You're soaking me. He splashed her again, turned away, dove under for 10 seconds. 14, 15, 18, and then came up 10 yards away, spluttering for air. Come on now, please, come in. Thomas swam towards the sea stack, the dark of his feet disappearing into the water. She watched his wetsuit ripple under the surface, a long, sleek shadow. A flock of seabirds serried over the low waves in a taunt. Her body stiffened. She edged forward again, and she waited. I have, she thought, made a terrible, terrible mistake. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to read Miss Adele Amidst the Corsets. It's about a drag queen. And one of the problems I find sometimes when I'm writing is I use different voices, then I have to read them and find that I can't do all the accents. So apologies if it's painful, but here we go. Well, that's that, Miss Dependency said, and Miss Adele, looking back over her shoulder, saw that it was. The strip of hooks had separated entirely from the rest of the corset. Dee held up the two halves, her big red slash mouth pulling in opposite directions. Well, at least you can say it died in battle, doing its duty. Bitch, I'm on in 10 minutes. Well, when an irresistible force like your ass don't sing meets an old immovable corset like this, you can bet as sure as you live, stop singing. It's your fault. You pulled too hard. Somebody's got to give, somebody's got to give, somebody's got to give. You pulled too hard. Pulling's not your problem. Dee lifted her bony white Midwestern leg up onto the counter in preparation to put on a thigh high. With a heel, she indicated Miss Adele's mountainous box of chicken and rice. Real talk, baby. Miss Adele sat down on a grubby velvet stool before a mirror, edged with blown-out bulbs. She was thickening and sagging in all the same ways, in all the same places as her father. Plus, it was midwinter. Her skin was ashy. She felt like some once valuable piece of mahogany furniture, lightly dusted with cocaine. This final battle with her corset had set her wig askew. She was 46 years old. Well, lend me yours. Oh, good idea. You can wear it on your arm. And tired to death, as the Italians say, tired to death. Especially sick of these kids, these millennials, or whatever they were calling themselves. Always on. No backstage to any of them, only front of house. Wouldn't know a sincere, sisterly friendship if it kicked down the dressing room door and sat on their faces. Miss Adele stood up, untaped, put a furry deerstalker on her head, and switched to her comfortable shoes. She removed her cape. Maybe stop with the cape. Recently, she'd only to catch herself in the mirror at a bad angle, and there was Daddy in his robes. The thing about undergarments, Dee said, is they can only do so much with the cards they've been dealt. It's sort of like Obama. Stop talking. Miss Adele zipped herself into a cumbersome, floor-length padded coat, tested, so the label claimed, by climate scientists in the Arctic. Looking swell, Miss Adele. Am I trying to impress somebody? Tell Jake I went home. Well, he's out front. Tell him yourself. I'm heading this way. You know what they say about choosing between your ass and your face? Miss Adele put her shoulder to the fire door and heaved it open. She caught the punchline in the ice-cold stairwell. You should definitely choose between one of those at some point. Aside from the nights she worked, Miss Adele tried not to mess much with the East Side. She had the same sunny, rent-controlled studio apartment on 10th Avenue and 23rd since '93, and loved the way the West Side communicated with the water and the light, loved the fancy galleries and the big anonymous condos, the High Line funded by bankers and celebrities, the sensation of clarity and wealth. She read the real estate section of the Times with a kind of religious humility. The news of a $34 million townhouse implied the existence of a mighty being, out there somewhere, yet beyond her imagining. But down here, it's depressing. Even worse in the daylight. Crappy old buildings, higgledy-piggledy on top of each other, ugly students, shitty pizza joints, delis, tattoo parlors. Nothing bored Miss Adele more than ancient queens waxing lyrical about the good old, bad old days. At least the bankers never tried to rape you at knife point or sold you bad acid. And then once you got past the village, everything stopped making sense. Fuck these little streets with their dumbass names. Even the logistics of Googling her location, remove gloves, put on glasses, find the phone, were too much to contemplate in this polar vortex. Instead, Miss Adele stalked violently up and down Rivington, cutting her eyes at any soul who dared look up. At the curb, she stepped over a frigid pool of yellow fluid with 3 paper plates frozen within it. What a dump. Let the city pull down everything under East 6th. Rebuild. Number it. Make it logical. Pack in the fancy hotels, not just 1 or 2, but a whole bunch of them. Don't half gentrify, follow through. Stop preserving all this old shit. And Miss Adele had a right to her opinions. 30 years in a city gives you the right. And now that she was, at long last, no longer beautiful, her opinions were all she had. They were all she had left to give to people. Whenever her disappointing twin brother, Devin, deigned to call her from his 3 kids and a labradoodle, goofy sweater-wearing, golf-playing, liberal Negro wet dream of a Palm Springs fantasy existence, Miss Adele made a point of gathering up her hard-won opinions and giving them to him good. I wish he could have been mayor forever. Forever. I wish he was my boyfriend. I wish he was my daddy. Or they should frack the hell out of this whole state. We'll get rich and succeed from the rest of you dope-smoking, debt-ridden assholes. You're the ones dragging us all down. Her brother accused Miss Adele of turning rightward in old age. But it'd be more accurate to say that she was done with all forms of drama, politics included. And that's what she liked about gentrification, in fact. Gets rid of all the drama. And who was left anyway to get dramatic about? The beloved was gone, and so were all the people she'd used over the years as substitutes for the beloved. Every kid who'd ever called her gorgeous had already moved to Brooklyn, Jersey, Fire Island, Provincetown, San Francisco, or the grave. This simplified matters. Work, paycheck, apartment, the various lifestyle sections of the Times, Turner Classic Movies, Nancy Grace, bed. Boom. Maybe a little Downton. You needn't put your face on to watch Downton. That was her routine, and disruptions to it, like having to haul ass across town to buy a new corset, were rare. Sweet Jesus, this cold. Unable to feel her toes, she stopped a shivering young couple in the street. British tourists, as it turned out. Clueless, nudging each other, and beaming up at her Adam's apple with delight, like she was in their guidebook, right next to the Magnolia Bakery and the Naked Cowboy. They had a map, but without her glasses, it was useless. They had no idea where they were. "Sorry, stay warm," they cried, hurried off, giggling into their North Face jackets. Miss Adele tried to remember that her new thing was that she positively liked all the tourists and missed Bloomberg and loved Midtown and the Central Park Nags and all the Prada stores and the Lion King and lining up for cupcakes wherever they happened to be located. As she gave those British kids her most winning smile, sashayed round the corner in her fur-cuffed Chelsea boots with the discreet heel. Once out of sight, though, it all fell apart. The smile, the straightness of her spine, everything. Even if you don't mess with it, even when it's not 7 below, it's a tough city. New York just expects so much from a girl, acts like it can't stand even the idea of a wasted talent or opportunity. And Miss Adele had been around. Rome says, enjoy me. London, survive me. New York, give me all you got. What a thrilling proposition, the chance to be all that you might be. Such a thrill until it becomes a burden. To put a face on, to put a self on, this had once been for Miss Adele pure delight. And part of the pleasure had been precisely this, the buying of things. Oh, she used to love buying things. Lived for it. Now it felt like effort. Now she never bought another damn thing again. She wouldn't even Clinton Corset Emporium. No awning, just a piece of cardboard stuck in the window. As Miss Adele entered, a bell tinkled overhead, an actual bell on a catch wire, and she found herself in a long, narrow room, a hallway really, with a counter down the left-hand side and a curtained-off cubicle at the far end for privacy. Bras and corsets were everywhere, piled on top of each other in anonymous white cardboard boxes, towering up to the ceiling. They seemed to form the very walls of the place. "Good afternoon," said Miss Adele, daintily removing her gloves, finger by finger. "I am looking for a corset." That's it. Thanks.